Hi everyone, Adrian here again with Trading Optionality, where we look for where we strive for optimality. I've got two special guests over here again today. Simon, whom you met during the first episode, who's the personal trainer and fitness model, and my partner in crime, Jamie Glancy, who's also the co-author of the Trading Optionality newsletter. I'm going to hand it over to you, Jamie, to introduce yourself to all the viewers because you can do a better job than I can. So over to you.
Lovely. So hi there, everyone. Thanks for watching. My name's Jamie Glancy. I'm a student at the moment studying an undergrad degree in, there's a camera, banking and finance in the City of London, which is very interesting. I spent 2 years working in the city before I took my degree, straight out of school. And really found the whole sort of trading and investment, that side of things, really interesting. And more recently, looking into, I think there's a camera, optionality, convexity, and some of the mathematics behind options and those sort of derivatives. So that's me.
What about your weightlifting and all that stuff as well, my friend? I mean,
yeah.
Don't forget about that.
We do have that side. There is that side. There is that side. I haven't got quite the background as Simon down there, but no, I'm a big fan of powerlifting and strongman, those sorts of feats of strength. So believe me, I was very happy when I saw the world record deadlift broken about a week ago by Hathor Bjornsson, 501 kilos, just unbelievable. Hopefully we'll be there one day, but not quite yet.
Anything you want to add, Simon?
Not really. That's an immense amount of weight, though. Absolutely incredible. Half a ton.
Yeah, half a ton. I mean, if you think about that, though, it's I don't even know how much I weigh at the moment. Not to deviate from everything else, but that is wow, roughly seven times my own body weight. I mean, just for me to even imagine lifting 7 times my body weight is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, he weighs something like 180 kgs, I think. And I mean, for anyone who is quite new to this field, to even get to the point where you weigh 180 kgs, that's 400 pounds. I mean, if you can lift 400 pounds as an average person, you are considered pretty damn strong by most accounts. And this guy weighs 180 kilograms. So it's really quite something. I mean, Jamie, you know, for instance, with your powerlifting and stuff, on a grand scale, you know, where does that kind of where does the average person fit in relative to that?
Well, there's a few different weight categories in powerlifting. It starts, I think, at about 45 is the lightest, and it goes up in sort of 10 kilo increments until you reach super heavyweight, which I think is 120 kilos plus. So he's basically covered about the entire range of all the weight classes above 120, super heavyweight. So it's just a ridiculous amount of weight. But then consider he is literally a giant. I think he's 6'10" or something like that. So imagine trying to start a fight with him. Just be ridiculous. The guy is monstrous. And he detailed sort of his journey up to lifting 501. He was saying the eating process was just incredibly painful. It was just unsustainable. Just the amount of food he had to eat constantly, and the sort of strain it was putting on his body, but all for that one lift on that one day. It's just monstrous.
Yeah, it really does sound monstrous. And you see, you just touched on something very crucial over there, the amount of food that he had to keep consuming and stuff. Now, once again, the question is going to boil down to, is that a convex process or is that a concave process that he was following to be able to lift that one repetition? You know, what is the payoff profile, you know, from your opinion? And I would like Simon to chip in on that as well, you know, because this is the kind of stuff that we are delving into over here. You know, how good is that really for you to be able to do it? Over to you.
Well, I think from a pure health standpoint, there's nothing healthy about being 180 kilos plus, despite the fact he's 6'11" or however tall he is, huge. There's nothing healthy about lifting 501 kilos, despite the fact that it's a massive weight, and you have to be very strong to lift it. On the strain on your body is ridiculous. The strain on your nervous system, ridiculous. I mean, he's a very, very tough guy. And the last man to lift 500 kilos was Eddie Hall in 2016. And Eddie spoke about the strain that it put on his body after he lifted it. He said he went partially blind in one eye. He couldn't remember who his kids were for a week after. Nothing about it sounds great. I mean, the process of getting there and actually doing it and then living with the aftermath of it sounds horrible. So in that sense, it's a concave payoff profile, because you have that sort of fixed return of lifting 501 kilos, but then you have everything that follows off after that, which is damaging to your body. And not many people have lifted 501 kilos, so the sample size is very small to test actually how damaging it is. So who knows, but I can't imagine it's healthy.
No, nor can I. What are your thoughts, Simon? I mean, you've dealt with quite a few people in so many different arenas of the work that you do.
Well, I would agree with what you both said, is that it's definitely not healthy. But when we talk about payoff profiles, it really depends on what the most important thing is to you as a person. So I suppose obviously for him, the payoff profile of lifting 501 kilos was worth it. But I suppose when you look at it in terms of anyone else watching, it would be great to lift that amount of weight, but the amount that you'd be willing to put into it probably wouldn't be that high. And that's why, like we just touched upon, there's only like two people that have lifted 500 kilos, because the payoff profile is so bad. Because the likelihood that you're actually going to do it as well is very slim, because of you're on the limit of what's possible there. So it depends, I think, what perspective you take on it, because it's quite subjective as to how important that lift is to a person. Like for me, it wouldn't be worth it. I would say the health payoff and the negative aspect to my health would not be worth it. But then that's not what field I'm in. The field I'm in is an aesthetic and a more of a health-based field with personal training. So I would never be a proponent for that. But obviously he is, and that was important to him at the time. Would he do it again? Maybe not, but you know.
Yeah. I mean, he said he'd go for 520 after. He said he had it in him.
Did he
but,
well, maybe he would. But then, yeah, I suppose that's why he's a record breaker and we're not yet.
Yeah, it's just incredible mentality.
Yeah, it is.
This is what I love about the perspectives, and I'm sure anyone watching this would agree, is that, you know, here we have two guys from, I wouldn't say opposing sides of the spectrum, but from, you know, complementary sides, you know, from powerlifting side and one from a physique side. I mean, I come from a calisthenics and martial arts kind of background, so I'm sort of like a blend between the two, because I do like lifting as well. So from my perspective, would I put myself through that? No way. I absolutely would not put myself through that kind of rigorous training, eat that much food. I think I would explode if I had to try and eat that much food in any case, to be quite honest with you.
Definitely.
And, you know, just from for my personal goals, which are mobility as well as flexibility and stuff, I think that would actually hamper my personal kind of growth and my overall personal development. But it is, from an absolute perspective, a remarkable kind of feat, you know, to say, wow, I've lifted 520 kgs. The only question I have about that, though, is how much optionality does that actually give you? How much carry over into other aspects of what you do in life, you know, in terms of, I don't know, shall we use lifting? Shall we use just general life, you know, being able to, you know, carry out your daily task? Does that have any carryover? Because I'm struggling to see if there is any kind of carryover. It's like It's like, for instance, even if we, Jamie, you would appreciate this, like taking a trade, for instance, you risk 100% of your account on one trade, for example, and you had paid off on that particular point. But as well as anyone else does, that from a risk management perspective, it was an absolute gamble, absolute freaking gamble. It's like that guy that you showed us. And, for anyone who's not quite familiar with the options, Simon, there was this guy, Jamie showed me, who put literally $700,000 on one trade by going short of the S&P 500 in the form of put options. Now, Jamie can explain this. I'm going to let Jamie explain the concept of Vega and all these kind of things, because we can use the Greeks, as they are called, in training, in a training perspective as well. But this guy got what's called Vega crushed. So Vega is essentially the amount by which an option's value rises or falls relative to the amount of relative to an increase or decrease of 1% in what's known as implied volatility. So this guy got Vega crushed because he did that at the bottom of the market. It's like literally trying to do a 1 rep max, if I can put it that way, with no warm up whatsoever. You literally just walk into a gym and you're trying to do a 200 kg deadlift with absolutely no warm up, and you expect not to get injured. But I've been rambling on. Jamie, over to you. You can explain this better than I can.
Yeah, I mean, hold on, I'm just going to adjust the camera here, see if okay, oh, that looks much better.
That's better. See you now.
Basically, what he did, he spent his life savings. It was 750,000. How he managed to make that much, anyway. But yeah, besides the point, he, like Adrian said, sold at the very bottom of the market, but he did so in a way that was the most detrimental. So if I can explain, in options terminology, the way I like to think about it, there's 3 dimensions to your profitability. You have price, so changes in price, changes in time, but then there's also changes in volatility. So you have these 3 dimensions that you need to consider before you enter an options trade. And you want to consider whether you think price is going to go up, whether price is going to go down or stay the same. And then you have to take a view on time. You have to take a view on volatility as well. Do you think volatility is going up or down or staying the same or whatever? What he did, he basically bet that the market was going to go down. He bet it was going to go down with more volatility than it had previously. And he also bet that it would do it quickly. So he was wrong on all counts because the market went up. As it went up, the level of volatility went down. And then it also did so, the way that the time worked for him, time worked against him because he timed this trade horribly. So he had all 3 of those factors working against him. And you look back after a week, I think the stock market had rallied 10% off the lows or something like that. And he had lost over half of his 750,000 initial investment. It's just really poor decision making, mostly from a risk management point of view. I mean, if he had done that trade with 1/50th of the size, you could have made the case for it. But to spend all your money on one trade, it's like putting all your money on red 31 or something at the roulette wheel. Just terrible. Terrible to see, but good sort of deterrent not to go down that path and do a similar thing.
Yeah, so he had literally 0 optionality in terms of how he wanted to move forward. And I think, what is the one thing that we always do when we enter any kind of exercise regime, whether it's on a daily basis or so. You look at the amount of risk that you are willing to take on that given day. It's how am I going to am I going to risk injury by adding 10 more kgs to the bar, to lift that amount of weight? And I think that's a very important question to always. I often ask myself that question more often now that I understand options and the whole optionality and all that behind it. Because the thing is, though, I've noticed that in both trading and training, it's very easy to let your ego run away with you. Incredibly easy. And it's so easy, it's even easier to delude yourself into thinking that you can lift something, from a physical perspective, but also handle the weight from a mental perspective. When you click that button and you have to handle the weight of all that risk that you are currently exposed to in any given point. So my thing is I like to know how much risk I can handle at any given point. And the one thing that also keeps coming to mind, and Jamie mentioned about volatility and stuff, from a physical perspective, what would you guys think would constitute implied volatility from a physical perspective? How do we look at our own selves and say, my implied volatility is very high or mine is very low? And maybe Jamie should start with this, and I'd like Simon's thoughts on this as well, to see how we could constitute that, because maybe there's something that we can work with over here that it could actually help, even for our own, not only for our own training purposes and just the way we get on with our daily activities as well, but also for viewers who might think, damn, I'm feeling off today, or damn, I'm feeling strong today. It's, if you see where I'm coming from, if you can build on to that, Jamie.
So this is how would you relate implied volatility to an aspect of training?
Yeah.
Okay. That's quite an interesting one. I think the first thing that springs to mind is sort of variable weight training. So bands and chains and things like that. So I know you talked about it in your last podcast, but the training effect from bands and how you can get more from a lower physical weight, but then have the band tension or chain tension on top of that to provide a sort of variable stimulus as the weight moves through its bar path or whatever. I actually think band tension quite illustrates the topic of implied volatility in weight training quite well, because the more band tension you have, I would sort of equate that to a higher implied volatility, where the from a literal sense as well, where the variability in stimulus on your body is changing constantly. So say you go up to a squat with 60 kilos on the bar, so 220s on 120 on each side, but then you load on at the top, say another 100 kilos of band tension. So you step up to that bar. At the very top of the bar, you have at that point 160 kilos of band tension. And if you say your max is 150, so you want to have that sort of overload at the very top, you're going to be shaking, you'll be struggling. You come down, it gets easier, and you have to explode out of the bottom with a ton of pace, a ton of power and force generation. You get to the top, and again, that sort of volatility of the lift picks up again, because all that tension that you've let go of at the bottom as the bands come in, that's suddenly on you again, and you're feeling it in your nervous system, and you're probably going to be shaking in the lift, and you'll be like lifting it up. And as you get to the very top, that's when the sort of volatility of the lift is at its maximum. But then at the same time, that's where you really learn where to strain and where to push through with the maximum amount of force possible. And there's one particular style of training which encompasses that in powerlifting. They're really famous, infamous almost, powerlifting gym in Ohio, Columbus. They're called Westside Barbell, and there's a guy called Louis Simmons, and I really like his training philosophy. It's controversial at times. Basically, he calls for three main types of training. There's maximum effort, where you're trying to lift the most amount of weight possible. So you'll have 2 days a week where you come into the gym and you try and lift as much as you can on a lower body exercise, so a squat or deadlift, and that could be with bands or chains attached. And then you have another day where you come in and do the same on your upper body. And then there's another style called dynamic effort, which is where you try and lift the weight as fast as possible with bands and chains attached, all with the aim of increasing force production. So he breaks it down into the equation force equals mass times acceleration, so F equals ma. What you're trying to do with your body is generate the most amount of force possible. And he states that there's 2 ways of doing that. You go down the M or the A. So M equals mass and A equals acceleration. You can move the most mass, so the most weight possible, or move with the most acceleration possible. So to move with the most acceleration, you take a lighter weight, but you really load up on the band tension, that sort of variable tension. So you really have like a high volatility in the lift where no one point is the same. So whereas a straight bar with straight weight on it has the same weight throughout the lift, when you add in different band tensions and chains and things like that, you're really changing the lift, and you're struggling and you're learning. The key is you learn how to strain, you learn how to handle volatility, and in that sense you become convex. There's a convex payoff curve to handling the volatility, to handling the variable weight, and to learning to teach your body how to power through struggle. And I think that's something that really links in both with training, whether you're doing a sport, whether you're in the gym, whether you're bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, CrossFit, whatever. Learning how to strain is really important, whether that's through a really tough set of 20 on squats, whether you're doing a 1 rep max, whether you're trying to do a pull-up with half your body weight attached to you. Learning how to strain and learning how to become convex to volatility or to variability, I think is really key. So I think that's one way that we can sort of link in Vega and implied volatility to training, is learning how to strain and learning how to benefit from the struggle, if that makes sense.
Jeez, I love that. What are your thoughts, Simon?
But the first thing I noticed is it's probably the powerlifting example is almost the opposite of what I would be doing in the gym. So all the things you're doing as a powerlifter is to make a lift easier to be able to move more weight, whereas everything I do in the gym, so I could be using the same principles but in the opposite way to make the lifts harder, where it's easy for me to create more muscle stimulus. So I could apply those same principles, but I'd have to reverse how they were enacted for what I'm doing, which is muscular development in terms of size and shape. Also, I think when you're doing that, you do, as you said, learn where the most difficult parts of a lift are for you, where the easier parts are, so you can apply that knowledge in the future to a straight lift. So you can use your knowledge from your variable lifts with your chains and your bands to practice points in your straight lift without them, which is obviously what you'd be doing when you go to a competition in powerlifting anyway. So I think it's very useful in terms of that, and applying it is very sensible. And I suppose it would be the same thing as learning. I mean, like I said, I don't know as much about the finance side as you guys do, but obviously you have to experience that volatility to know what works and what doesn't in the future, I guess. And that the same applies for your training. Yeah.
And I think it's, if you're able to handle it, then it's like you say, if you can do, so from the sort of powerlifting side of things, if you can do a huge 1 rep max with like a bent bar with a ton of band tension, stick a few chains on there as well to a box, if you can do that lift, completely alien, but it's just incredibly tough. If you can learn to strain through that, then going to a competition and doing just a regular straight bar squat with a wide stance to minimize range of motion, if you can do that initial really tough lift, then the straight bar is nothing, basically.
Yeah, makes sense.
You know what this also reminds me of? Jamie, have you read this book called The Black Swan? I can't remember if you mentioned having read it or not, by Nassim Taleb. Jamie, are you still there? Oh, I think we lost Jamie.
Still got a free frame of him.
Let me just quickly see if he's back. Jamie, are you back?
Yeah, back now. Yeah, don't know what happened there.
No problem.
Yeah.
I was asking you if you've read this book called The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. I think you have mentioned that you read it.
Yeah.
Now what you guys both kind of described there, especially when you did the whole thing about learning how to struggle, learning how to go through the difficult parts and all that stuff, I can't help but notice a theme of anti-fragility or robustness that also gets built into this. Now, for anyone who might not be familiar with the concept of anti-fragility, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that it's based on the principle that the more shocks you take, the more you benefit from it. Now, that can be an object, it can be a principle, it can be the human body, I think, is a relatively good example of something that is anti-fragile in one sense and fragile in another sense, because it's really weird how fragile the human body is, especially if you get a disease, for instance, then you become very fragile. But at the same time, when you get a disease, your anti-fragility also starts coming out because it heals itself. Your immune, in fact, let me put it this way: your immune system is something that is anti-fragile, not the human body so much, but the immune system, because every knock to the system makes it stronger. Every time you're exposed to germs or bacteria or viruses or those things, your body becomes stronger, provided it survives, of course. And I couldn't help but notice a similar theme, even in both approaches that you described, where you, for instance, said, you push through the lifts, but also you reverse engineer the lifts and actually make them harder for yourself to be able to achieve the exact goals that you want. And it's just quite remarkable to see how these things tie in with one another. It's not as if one approach is the best approach, where you can use, because you can clearly use the same principles, albeit in a different way, and achieve desirable results, regardless of what your goals actually are. So I just thought I'd add that, and like you guys to build onto that as well.
No, I think it's a good point, and especially because there is the Taleb book, Anti-Fragile, and
yeah, I read it. Very good.
Yeah, it's a good book. Basically, gaining from chaos. So if a bad thing happens, you respond well to it, essentially. So I know the first thing that came to mind when you said the human body can be fragile, anti-fragile. The first thing that popped to mind was, you hear these stories about sort of mums when their kids are trapped in like a really dangerous situation, like a log or is on them or something, like a really heavy log. They suddenly gain this sort of almost superhuman strength to lift it off, because it's something terrible has happened and they have to respond, otherwise it's game over, pretty much. And that's the first aspect that sprung to mind, was the ability for the human body and the human mind to respond in an anti-fragile manner to chaos. Don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Simon.
Well, I was thinking about just training effect as well. I think that's a really good point, what you said, actually. And there's you hear a lot of stories about that. So it's definitely a thing that happens to the human body. So I think that in itself is fascinating. But in terms of just a very simple training effect, it's a phrase that I throw around quite a lot, is that if you don't do something when you go to the gym that makes you at least somewhat nervous, if there's an uncertainty that you can complete a certain task or lift a certain weight, then your body's not going to be able to progress forward. So there has to be that point where you feel fragile, in a sense, if that's what we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to get what you would call the anti-fragile response from your body. So in order to get better at dealing with a stimulus, you have to put yourself in a position where that stimulus is more than you can currently handle. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle to make progress in a gym environment, is that you do what you're comfortable with, and you have to go beyond that to the point that you feel uncomfortable or fragile to actually make progress. So I think it's really super relevant to anything you're doing in the gym, really, is to put yourself in a somewhat weak position, because you have to do that to progress forward.
Yeah. Well, that's that topic of sort of progressive overload, isn't it?
Yeah, basically.
You have
Basic terms, yeah.
Yeah, continually either add weight, add reps, or change it up entirely and do something really hard.
Yeah.
I think there's a good quote actually that quite fittingly I read the other day from Ed Cohen, who's a sort of world record powerlifter from a few years back. And he said he was asked by one of his trainees who had a, call it 220 kilo max squat.
Yeah.
And he'd lifted, I think, about 420 kilos in the squat or something like that, something ridiculous. And the guy with the 200 kilo squat said to him, I can't imagine how that must feel. How does 900 pounds feel on your back? And he said back to him, well, how does 500 pounds feel on your back? It's the same thing. It's the same max effort. Feeling that weight is hard. It's hard regardless. So
that reminds me of Einstein's theory of relativity, for instance, where, and I don't know if we spoke about that at the event, you and I, Jamie, but I know Simon and I have spoken about this many times before, and this is something that I've delved into ad nauseum by now, but it's a really important concept. As he said, how does 500 pounds feel on your back relative to how does 900 pounds feel on your back? It's all relative to the individual. I mean, for yourself, for instance, to lift 200 kgs is a lot, but for a guy like Hathor Bjornsson, to him that's not a lot, relatively speaking. But I think that that's also a really important thing in trading terms as well, because you and I, for instance, let's use that guy that we mentioned earlier on, with $750,000 bet on put options. Now, to a guy like that who split his life savings into it, that is an F ton of money, for lack of a better word, to put down. I mean, I wouldn't mind having access to 750,000 pounds that I can put down on a bet. But for someone else like a Jeff Bezos, for example, that is literally 2 minutes worth of earnings, or a minute's worth of earnings, or something really even less than that. So it goes to show once again that everything in life is bloody relative. Einstein was correct on that. There literally always is someone better off than yourself or worse off than yourself. Or stronger or weaker or taller or shorter or any of those kind of things. And once again, it just boils down to that question you have to ask yourself is, where exactly am I? What can I handle right now? And where do I see myself going with what I have? I don't know if I'm making any sense with the way that I'm putting this, but that's kind of the theme that I'm just building onto over here. I think we lost Jamie again.
Really?
See.
Like that, or he's sitting really still.
Well, I doubt that he's a chameleon. So, chameleons can sit very still and just.
I do think what you said though about relativity is a good point, and I actually I use it quite a lot, because what I was talking to you about before is actually a sales model that I incorporated back when I was doing sales, which was basically a sales theory of perceived value. So sales and or training is all, you're only going to put that, welcome back, that effort in if the value of the result is perceived to be more value than the effort you're putting in. So you can apply that to making a sale, which would be a monetary value versus the physical value of the product. That's why you part with your money. But in terms of a training goal or a trade, obviously the value to you of being successful in that part of your training, or the value to you in making that trade, has to be more than you either parting with your money or the time that you put in. So I think what I would be willing to do in the gym or with my diet. So we were talking earlier about the 500 kilo deadlift and the amount of huge amounts of food you had to put in and everything. I wouldn't do that, but I would diet for 23 weeks down to 4.5% body fat, and he probably wouldn't want to do that. So, and it's because the result is more important to me than his result. But the amount of work you put in is a similar level. It's just a different result that you're going for. And I think that's why everyone's work ethic is relative to what they're doing. So I wouldn't put in as much work into, say, a project perhaps that you would, unless it was crossing over and we were doing the same thing, right? But in terms of how you progress, there has to be a perceived value of the result to you before you take action. So I think relativity is like super important in either gym, business, anything that you have to put your time or your money into, or your health. That is, it has to have a value for you at the end.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, sort of relative value to everyone, because there's a theory in economics, it's called efficient market hypothesis, which essentially states that all prices that you see, so you could buy one stock of Apple, one share of Apple for however much it's trading for nowadays, it's trading at some set price, and that price is 100% fair of value. It indicates all sort of future value. There's no point buying it because it's entirely valued, it's fairly valued, and there's no point in its value. You don't think it's going to go down, you don't think it's going to go up. But I mean, you straight away, what does that say? It means that there'd be no trading. There's no point in trading, because all the trade is you parting with your money because you think there's more value in putting it elsewhere. So if you want to buy a share of Apple because you think it's going to go up 10% in the next year, then that's your call. But then the person selling you that probably has the opposite view, given there's a few nuances, but in general, if there's a trade, that's why it's happening, because you both see value in performing that same trade, and you found each other, and you can make a market through that. So like you said, I mean, like you wouldn't be willing to eat as much to lift the 500 kilos in the same way that Thor wouldn't want to diet down to sub 5% body fat. There's a sort of relative trade-off, and I think that's key in what everyone wants to do, really, in trading. Obviously there's a sort of very clear link, but then also in your fitness and how you choose to handle your body and what you want to do with it, whether you want to supersize it and go on to lift huge weights, or if you want to shred down and step on a bodybuilding stage. There's very different approaches and relative value for all parties.
Yeah, I think that really is key, though, where you both made the point that you have to find value in something that you do. It's like, for instance, when you and I look at options chains, and I haven't got any with me, otherwise I would have shared my screen right now. But an options chain is essentially just a list of prices, strike prices, and the price you pay for each of those strikes. But we can go into more detail at another particular point. But what we're essentially doing, when you mentioned about the whole view where, for instance, you buy Apple and you say, oh, I believe it's going to go up 10% over the next year, and someone else has the opposing kind of view, we do that in a variety of ways on a daily basis outside of stock trading altogether. When you invest in your physical training, or when you believe I'm going to be 10% stronger in a year from now, or I'm going to look 10% better, however you try to define that, in a way from now, I'm going to become 10% smarter. I think that is such a good point that you just made, and I haven't actually thought of it that way before until right now, that everything is a trade in life and a negotiation at the same time. because you are negotiating with yourself on a daily basis and with other people as to what you are willing to accept, what you are willing to strive for, and also potentially what you're willing to settle for. And I would like to get your thoughts on that as well, within the context of everything that we've been talking about, because you've really given me a few things to think about here, and I would like to hear what you have to say about this.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, think about it like this: if you go to town, not now, obviously, but 6 months ago, so if you go to town and you've got Costa, Starbucks, Nero, Pret, a little independent coffee chain or whatever on the street, in your head, you're subconsciously probably you're making a choice. You're evaluating things. You're saying, right, well, I can go to Pret and get a coffee for 99p. I can go to Costa and get one for £2.50. But where does the value lie? Is it worth me spending 99p for a Costa one where it might not be as good? Or do I spend twice the price and go to Starbucks and get one which isn't twice as good? It's these constant sort of mental evaluations that you're doing subconsciously based on, in my view, an entire life's experience of well, you earn money, you choose where to spend that money, and based on all the things that you've consumed, maybe you don't know explicitly, consciously how you've ranked them, but subconsciously you're ranking these things and you're thinking, right, well, Pret is better or Costa's better, but Costa costs more than Pret, so where does the value lie? Where's the relative value? Am I willing to shell out more for a better coffee, or do I want to go to Pret and get not as good as coffee but for a cheaper price? It's the basis of how sort of the economy works. People will only part with their money if they see value, and it's the same with trading. So with options, say if you want a convex payoff curve, you have to pay for that luxury, and you probably have to pay a little bit extra to gain extra convexity. So Adrian, you'll know if you want to buy an out the money put on the S&P, you'll know that its relative value given by implied volatility, given by the skew, is more than a sort of at the money. And Simon, all we talk about implied volatility and these things. It's a measure of relative value. So you can compare different options by their implied volatility and assess relative value that way. It's just a neat way of doing it. But so Adrian, if you wanted to buy an out the money put on the S&P 500, you will pay over and above for that extra convexity, because you have Vega convexity there. There's delta convexity for your gamma, and then you pay a little bit less in theta, but you pay an additional price for purchasing that, and that's sort of priced in. But still, if you're going to buy that, you buy it because you believe there's value. Well, you buy it either because there's sort of asymmetric information. So what does the seller of that put know that you don't? And it works both ways. If you're the seller of that put, what does the buyer of it know that you don't, sort of thing. So if you're the seller, you think something is overvalued, so you just sell it off and gain a bit of that premium. But if you're the buyer, you're saying, well, look, I think there's value in purchasing that option because at some point or another, you predict over the life of that option, it's going to provide enough value and enough convexity to give me, I spend 100 quid on it and I get back 2,000 quid on it. You believe there's value in that, but then the person selling it to you for 100 quid believes, well, I don't think there's ever going to come a point where it achieves value to produce a sizable loss for me, so I'm happy selling it. And again, it's complete relative value, and it's the basis of trade. It's the basis of where you choose to purchase your coffee. It's where, if you want to go to IKEA or somewhere higher end than that, it's entirely an assessment of value, subconsciously or consciously. So that's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, so I suppose in the with your coffee example, it would be the equivalent of walking to a town that had a coffee place that you knew and a coffee place that you didn't. And the coffee place that you didn't know looked okay, was relatively cheap. Let's say it was a lot cheaper than the place that you did know, but you still go to the place where you're confident you're going to get the value from, even though you're spending more money to get it, right? So I suppose you go where the safety is in theory. So I suppose that kind of carries over to making a trade.
Yeah, and it's that sort of economic idea of opportunity cost, where if you spend £1 on something, you lose out on the ability to spend £1 on another thing.
Yeah,
and you, as well as economic theory goes, is saying that you spending that £1 on something is because it grants you, in your sort of total knowledge of coffee or whatever it is you're buying with a £1, that provides you the most economic value at that point in time. But then obviously you run into problems because you don't know every single coffee place out there. You don't know exactly what that £1 can buy. You just don't know, because it's impossible. You can't know everything that £1 will buy, and then you go out and choose the most efficient use of that £1 to go and do that. Obviously there are inefficiencies in that sense, but in the sort of the realm of knowledge that you have, you will spend that £1 in the way that suits you best, the way that gives you the most utility is the economic term. The way that gives you the most utility is how you will go about spending your money if you're rational.
You just mentioned a key word over here, and this led me to a question that I would like to address to you, Jamie, is, do you think that even the principles and concepts of optionality, all the great things associated with it, because that's what we strive for at the end of the day, if you really think about it, though. You train, for instance, because you want to become stronger, because it gives you more options. You become more flexible, it gives you more options. Whatever you want to do. Financials is a perfect example. You earn more money because you want more options in life, and forget about buying nice things. You want to be able to travel. You want to be able to enjoy high quality food, more quality time with your family, or so on and so forth. But when you mention utility, I couldn't help but wonder, is there a diminishing marginal utility of return when it comes to optionality as well? Does it actually reach that point, or is that not something that is applicable to this concept?
I mean, it depends, because the concept of convexity and then the concept of diminishing returns, they're kind of polar opposites, because convexity means that the further along you go, the more it picks up, but then marginal utility, the other way around, the further you go, the less you gain. So in terms of, again, the only way that it makes sense to me is just relative value. How far are you willing to go? How much effort are you willing to put in? How much time are you willing to spend? How much money are you willing to spend to gain optionality? And is it worth it? That's really what it boils down to. I mean, if I want to go, taking it back to gym and fitness and training, is going to the gym 6 times a week that much more beneficial than going to the gym 4 times a week, depending on what you want to do? So say I have to drive 20 minutes, half an hour to get to my gym. So do that twice, a 1 hour round trip, and then get there and spend a membership. And is doing it 4 times a week, does it deliver enough utility? Obviously, won't be as much because of marginal utility as 6 days a week, but is the sort of difference enough? Does the opportunity cost cover it if I go 4 days a week versus 6 days a week? What am I losing out on by going 6 days a week that I'd have time to do other things for the 2 days that I'm not going? But then if I go 4 days a week, what am I losing out on by not going the 6 days? So it's relative value, how you choose to value things that you can't do if you choose to do something. So in that sense, you've got opportunity costs baked into that too. So It's a difficult one with optionality.
Yeah,
Definitely.
no, I think I didn't phrase it quite as well as I wanted to. You know, well, when I ran it through in my head, it didn't, and actually said it didn't match up as well. But I think what I was trying to say is, though, you probably can also get to a point where you have too many choices to contend with. And optionality is choice at the end of the day as well. You know, so we all want more choices, we all want more optionality. But I have also read studies where they show that more choice can actually have an adverse effect on a person's well-being and on your psyche as well. Let's use an example. You walk into a store, let's say Asda, for example, and you go to the cereal section. You've got 30 different types of cereal over there. You only need one, but you look at these 30 and you go, geez, which one do I go for now? I mean, which one will deliver the optimal results in terms of what I want? I want to fill my belly, I want to feel good, I want to enjoy my food, but there's a chocolate flavor and a strawberry flavor, all the same bloody thing. And I guess that's where I was going with the diminishing marginal utility of return with optionality. And I was just wondering if you can actually theoretically get that with a point in finance as well. You know, for example, where you take specific trades and you just find that, you know what, I've got more optionality on this trade, but I'm not getting nearly as much, or how should I say, my marginal utility of the return is just diminishing it's just diminishing as it goes up and up and up, if you see where I'm coming from with that.
Right. Well, I think from a trading basis, I don't think that argument holds, because if you have sort of convex exposure, then if you take the rate of change ought to be ever increasing, so you should be compensated by the convexity should compensate for the loss in marginal utility, because the jumps in dollar profit are greater and greater and greater as you move up. I mean, that's not the case in reality. So you probably could argue that at some point you have enough optionality, but it depends what you're trying to achieve, I think. So, but definitely, that, like you said, with the point with, if you go to a shop and you've got 30 different items to choose from, all the same type of item, and you're looking, you think, well, they're all very similar. Which one do I want? And you kind of fall into this trap where you're sort of, it's sort of similar to paralysis by analysis is the lovely term. It's you've got so much choice. Or which one do I go for? I think definitely at some point there is some diminishing returns where it becomes detrimental to have too much choice. And like you said, you read studies which show that to be the case. But I think that point holds less strong for trading. But then in life, where, I mean, you can't, in trading, you can put everything down to a dollar profit. There's a nice standardized unit to assess outcomes. Then in life, it's so much more difficult to assess things by sort of a standardized dollar amount, because there are intangibles. So how can you measure those intangibles? And I think so much, sort of off on a tangent here, so much sort of philosophical debate comes from that, because you're thinking, oh, well, there's no standardized measure of counting, so apples to oranges. And there's in ethics, in the philosophy of ethics, it's a real tangent here, but in that field, you're looking at, some people value the human life or each action as having some sort of utility, as some sort of amount that is a standardized unit, but it's all theoretical. I mean, it's really difficult once you get down there. Everything turns into sort of personal preference, and ultimately your life experience up until that point. How do you value different things? You might value it one way, but then you take 10 other people, they'll value it 10 other ways, and it's just an impossibility down that point. So yeah, at some point, optionality in life offers diminishing marginal utility down to the point where it becomes detrimental, less so in trading because there's a more standardized unit of return, whereas life doesn't have that because life is bloody complicated. So there's no way to compare two things like for like.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and thanks for clarifying that. I just wanted to get your opinion on a question like that, because I think what we're also doing over here is asking some of the hard questions in life. It's not always about asking the easy questions and just getting a standardized answer. I mean, what else? Why else would we do this? There's no point in doing that if we ask the questions and give the same answers that you can get from Googling them, so to speak. Even though arguably you could Google it, but I prefer to just have an actual conversation about that stuff. I think we lost Jamie again. But no matter. I'll just continue with my thought process. And I guess the thing is, yeah, optionality is great. I mean, optionality and adding more optionality to your life is a really, really wonderful thing. And as Jamie made the point, you're back again. Welcome back. No, I was just saying to Simon that when it boils down to it, optionality is a fantastic thing to have. I mean, rather have more choices in life than not having choices in life. I mean, that's pretty much what it boils down to. But at the same time, it is also important to know that. Oh, have we lost you again? Your internet's struggling a bit.
I think you know what you're saying about having more options.
Yes.
And how I think too many options is only bad if you have options without context.
That's a good point.
So
please delve into that.
Trading, if there's 10 different ways, let's say, to build your arms, it doesn't really matter what it is, but I would only know which ones are going to benefit me if I have the context alongside it. So for one person, one option might be great in their context, but for me, it might be different. For example, I can't do one exercise because I've got a certain injury, so I have to do another one. So you have to have context in your options. So for your cereal example, if you've got 30 cereals and you've tried 10 and you don't like those, you've got 20 to choose from now. So you've added context to your options. So I think in anything, even in trading, I would imagine that options without context are probably meaningless because you need context behind your options.
That's actually a really excellent point, though, and I've never actually thought about that until you mentioned it, because I think how should I say this? I think that when we evaluate markets, we obviously try to look for context as well, as you pointed out, Simon. That's a really important thing, because it's useless to just look at the data and accept things or accept the price or accept the current valuation as being necessarily correct. That's where it is at that particular moment, but it's not necessarily correct. So I do like what you said about the context. But I think at the same time, context is often one of the hardest things to measure and to accurately quantify because it's so open to interpretation. It's super, super open to subjectivity and interpretation. It's like, just to give you a bit of context, for instance, prime example here, the bond market, if you're looking at it from a finance perspective, the bond market, which is essentially your credit market, is experiencing massive lows in yields. I mean, the 10-year yield on a US 10-year treasury bond. So essentially, you buy a US government bond and you get an annual yield, how much they pay you to buy their debt. That's something like 0.7% per year that you get at the moment for a 10-year bond. So over the course of a 10-year period, you will get, Well, what does that total to, Jamie? 7%. You know, well, maybe a little bit more than 7% if you compound it annually, which is nothing. If you look at the amount of risk that you have to take relative to that. But if you look at the stock market is 600 points from the high at the moment. You know, relative to where it was, it's 600 points up from where it was, and you think, oh, okay, you know, well, what do these guys know that we don't know? But if you look at the states of the world, you know, the greatest states of the world with COVID, I mean, we're doing this because of COVID, in any case, this whole activity. And then you look at it and you ask yourself, how the hell are we even at these kind of levels? You know, with all of this negative narrative that is going on, you know, with all the fallout that is taking place. I mean, it's such an important question, and yet it's so difficult to quantify. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, Jamie, you have any thoughts on this whole thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole point of subjectivity, I mean, you could go to one person in the street and they'll say, oh, well, they're saying this calm. They say, oh, the world's ending. I can leave my house now in the UK, but I've lost so many personal freedoms because of this virus. Whereas you could go to someone on Wall Street and they'll say, oh, things are actually looking up because the stock market's back 50% from the lows and the future looks bright. And you can go to a range of different people and find so many different opinions and perspectives on things. And then when you think about different markets and market prices as just sort of an amalgamation of all those different opinions, and the prevailing one wins, whether or not you agree with it or not becomes really difficult, because I mean, you could sit there now and say, look, no one is doing any real economic activity, everything's shut down, the velocity of money has fallen off a cliff, there's nothing there, no one's spending money. You should say, well, stock market should be, well, what, really low, 50% down or something. And then that could be one person's opinion, someone who's, I don't know, intrinsically negative or something. But then you could go to someone who's an optimist and they'll say, well, look, in 6 months to a year, everything's going to be back to how it was. There's loads of pent up demand in the system. Everyone wants to go out and go on holiday and spend their cash on service sector luxuries and things like that. Really sort of polar opposites opinions, but you'll find that everywhere. But then it's difficult to interpret what the market is thinking or what exactly it's thinking. I mean, you can tell a lot about sentiment, whether things are good or bad, but it doesn't speak to you. It doesn't talk to you. All you can know is it's up X%, it's down X%. There won't be some explicit cause. There'll be a number of different causes and reasons that people have for buying stocks or selling stocks, and really a market is just the combination and the sum total of all those opinions baked into some price. But people necessarily are not great predictors of the future. So
no, we're horrible at it.
No, really bad, really bad.
We are
horrible. Humans over like a computer. There's a great book. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow by.
I'm reading it now. Good.
Yeah, Daniel Kahneman. There's a section, sort of 3/4 in, where he talks about how sort of AI, not AI, but like algorithms with some sort of like basic inputs. We're told, right, so given a student's grades, their behaviour, of other inputs like sort of family income bracket, and given all those things in 20 years, what would their income be? And what they did, they put algorithms with these inputs versus humans armed with sort of subjective knowledge, and that sort of they could see that sort of je ne sais quoi that machines can't, and they compared the results in 20 years, and the algorithm with zero emotional bias outperformed the humans remarkably. So I think think about the stock market as a place where the prevailing emotion wins, where sentiment is everything. And if people are feeling hopeful, then it'll be up. If they're feeling really low, then it'll be down. And you just flip between the two. Flip between the two. So you're up, down all the time. As it's a bipolar representation of sentiment.
It's such an important thing you mentioned regarding the inability of humans to predict the future, and yet that's what we continually try to do on a daily basis. You know, whether we are trying to predict what's going to happen 5 minutes from now, or an hour from now, or a day from now, and yet whenever I find myself trying to predict the future, I keep reminding myself of the great turkey problem that you would be highly familiar with. And, you know, for context, the great turkey problem is another concept from Nassim Taleb's book called The Black Swan. And I first read of it in Anti-Fragile. So essentially it works this way. So a turkey is fed for a period of 1,000 days before it is slaughtered, you know, for Thanksgiving. So over the course of that 1,000 days, it becomes very easy to assume that at some point the turkey will believe humans love turkeys, because every day the human will come and it will feed the turkey. It will give it its X amount of corn or wheat or whatever it is being fed. And then on the 1,001st day, it will not be such a great day to be a turkey when you get slaughtered and sent off to the shops. And the whole principle behind that is that 1,000 days of history will not give you any better indication of what will happen one day into the future. And that to me is one of the biggest things that we need to always keep in mind, you know, whether it's with our training and with our trading and stuff. Where we were before is not necessarily a reflection of what will happen into the future. As the saying goes, past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. I know that sounds really corny, but that is a reality. And I mean, Simon, you would know as well, you know, from personal experience that there's no way that you can guarantee that you're going to perform as well a year from now necessarily as what you are today. You know, you might be an injury, there might be whatever that could have happened that could hold you back. I'm not predicting that, by the way, just so you know, nor wishing that upon you. I'm just saying that these are the kind of things that happen. Life is filled with so many twists and turns. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Simon?
I think there's an element of creating your own personal future if you work in the right way and do the right things, but you can never know what's going to happen. All you can do is take positive steps towards what you want to happen. I think that's all you can do. I think that's training, trading, life, anything really. I think they say people that work harder get better luck. So luck isn't a thing really, basically, is what that says to me. You have to make as best a decision as you can based on the information you have now. None of us have got future knowledge, so that's really all that you can do is use what you have now and hope for the best. Work towards what you want. It's the same with training. If you consistently make the right decisions and consistently train, there sadly is no guarantee that your body is going to respond how you want it to. And it's the same with making a trade. I could do everything the world's best athlete does. I could have a good starting point, and by the end, my body could look completely different. And the fact is that maybe I was never destined to be a champion athlete or whatever it might be, because you can't guarantee the responses you're going to get, even if you do make the right decisions. But all you can do is learn from the stuff that didn't happen to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts from you guys? I mean, this conversation has been so enlightening and so interesting. And I know we could carry on all day, but we also have a cut-off time in terms of what we can record before we start killing people with potential boredom, if you know what I mean. But I'm very happy with everything that we managed to get through during this session, and I really do want us to have another one, because I can see that there's so much idea sharing and idea generation between us. That's not only I learned a lot today, and I hope I can speak for everyone. I learned a hell of a lot today, from both of you, and I just feel that my life is a richer place today because of all these other things that I can apply and these concepts, and also forcing me to just look at things from a different way. And it's like what I said to Jamie about the black hearts and the red spades. Sometimes you need to accept that life can have games where there are black hearts and there are red spades, and not all games have got black spades and red hearts. And I think that's what I'm trying to do with this as well, not just with optionality, but also to help people see things from a different perspective. What might look like a shade of blue could actually be a shade of purple if you just look at it from a slightly different angle. So those are my final thoughts that I would like to add to this. Jamie, Simon, whichever one of you wants to add final thoughts, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to add one more point onto what you were saying, Simon, is that you can never know the future. You could do a squat, I'll use the squat as an example. You can just squat with proper form you do it twice a week or something every day for a year. You expect your body to react in a certain way, but there is no guarantee that it will. You don't know what pressures are building up. It's just impossible. One thing that I think is epitomised by optionality is that whilst you don't know the future, you have to act under uncertainty. There's no way around it. You have to do something, otherwise nothing happens, right? So all you can do is expose yourself in the best way to uncertainty. So I think that's epitomised by convexity, by having a convex payoff path. So even though you don't know what's happened, you want to know that there'll be some beneficial outcome somehow. You don't want to suffer the risk of ruin. You don't want to even take that risk in the first place, because then the game's over, right? So you want that, and convexity illustrates that point wonderfully. And then I think what we're trying to do with optionality, by giving people options in an uncertain world, is perfect, because nothing's certain, but all you can do is expose yourself to uncertainty in the best way possible with optionality.
I think that's a pretty good spot to end on, guys. It's a very nice point. Well made.
Yeah, I think so too. And I just want to say thanks to both of you for taking the time to do this. I mean, it's as I said, I know that if we sat down and chatted, we would literally carry on all afternoon and into the evening, because clearly we have a lot of things that we like to share, and experiences that we've built up, but time limits, I'm afraid. Time still is a constant.
There'll be another time.
There'll be another time. So guys, thanks a lot, and I think that was really, really good. So let's aim for another conversation. Next time I would like to chat a bit about things like exponential growth. We didn't even get to that, and I would love to hear Jamie's thoughts on this one as well. Your thoughts as well, Simon, because I think that's also something that you often see at the start of a new training program, is that exponential growth curve, and then it starts flattening out. How you avoid the pitfalls of certain things. That's another conversation. So to all of the optionalistas who watch this right to the end, thanks a lot, much appreciated, and until next time, cheers.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for that.
Thanks.
Have a good one.